Hi, I'm Jill Hendershot Roth. Thanks so much for joining me today to learn about paradise paddocks. What if your paddock could be paradise for your horse? What do they really need to be happy? Of course, fresh hay and sparkling water, some sort of shelter from the elements, be it man-made or trees. What about a soft place to roll and snooze? Space to satisfy their need for daily travel? Room to frolic with their friends? Jamie Jackson has a wonderful answer to all of these needs, the Paddock Paradise. It is a track system set up to keep your horse on the move 24/7, and it is genius. We finally finished the last phase of our Paddock Paradise, and we thought we would share it with you. Of course, the options are endless. This is just one example of how the track system works best at our farm. We learned a lot during the construction, and we included ideas and pitfalls you may find helpful. Mr. Jackson is a farrier and spent a great deal of time studying the feet of wild mustangs. He was astounded by how healthy and strong they were. He began to wonder if we could design a housing environment that would help our horses to develop the same hardy hooves. When horses are stalled, they will shuffle a meager 800 steps per day. In a typical rectangular paddock, they'll manage about 3,000 steps a day. With a Paddock Paradise, you can expect them to trek about 3 miles a day in a 1-acre setup. The idea is to create a track through which your horses will travel to enjoy the splendors of their home. It is typically a 12-foot wide path around the perimeter of the paddock. Then you can add your enticements. For example, you might put the hay in one corner, your sand for rolling in another, salt blocks in a different space, water in yet another, etc., etc. Each time the herd would like to enjoy another one of life's pleasures, they must travel. We are guesstimating that our horses are walking about 5 to 6 miles a day. I base this estimate on the fact that if I say within the paddock, I walk 2.8 miles just mucking and distributing hay nets. You can design the layout any way that works best for your property. Jackson suggests that it include varied foot types, hills and valleys, twists and turns, logs to step over, and more. With the barn at the center of our track, we didn't really follow a perimeter type layout. Here's a schematic that shows what our design looks like from a bird's eye view. If you follow the perimeter of the outside of the track and make a complete loop, it's just under 3/10 of a mile long. The red arrows show where we keep our hay. There are 2 hay or loafing sheds for shelter and eating, rain or shine. The horses are able to freely pass through the barn stalls, which hold their free choice salt and offer more shelter. A third area of hay nets is distributed around depending on the weather. We feed them their supplements and pellets in the barn stalls and use temporary stall guards to keep them separated while feeding. You can see the blue arrow shows where the water troughs are. There are 3 places where they can roll and or sleep. They are in continuous contact with each other, which research has shown improves mental health, sleep quality, and satisfies their need for tactile interaction. So now you know you want a paradise paddock. What's the first step? Ask an expert. When we first decided to create our little horse haven, we reached out to our local soil and water conservation district and the folks at Horses for Clean Water. They were both a wealth of information and saved us quite a bit of time and money. Learning the tricks of the trade for your area regarding such things as footing selection, mud management, and staying in harmony with your environment can save you a ton of money in the long run. I know several folks across North America that replaced all of their footing, moved arenas, and started over completely from scratch due to poor installation or bad information. For example, we were considering using crushed hazelnut shells for some of the footing in our trackway. Oregon's the largest grower of hazelnut shells, so this is really inexpensive here. Seemed like a great plan, and then we just used the expensive sand on the high traffic areas. We thought this was a great choice until Elaine Blickley from Horses for Clean Water shared with us the pitfalls of mixing organic and inorganic materials. It may work fine while it's new, but eventually the organic material breaks down and you need to replace it. It is virtually impossible to dispose of this mixed medium. She probably saved us thousands of dollars with just that one little tidbit. Also, the gentleman that did all of the grading and tractor work was a wealth of information. He was able to share which slant would be best for the ground and from which direction the winds and storms would come. We had planned to have our hay shed opening towards the west, as it flowed best with the track. Fortunately for us, he knew about which way the rains came and saved us from a lot of unhappy, wet horses. Let's talk about footing choices. For your primary footing choice, depending on your area, you may be able to use the dirt that's already there. But if you have heavy rains or a horse with special needs, you may need to bring in special footing. Pete Ramey suggests that the best footing for horses with a history of laminitis and other hoof challenges is pea gravel. And we knew we wanted sandy areas where the horses would be able to roll and sleep. With all of this in mind, we chose to divide the track system up into segments of pea gravel and sand. This has worked out remarkably well. The horses move around comfortably and enjoy a good roll and snooze in the soft sandy areas. One change I would recommend to you is that we surrounded our loafing sheds with sand. This does increase our horses' exposure to sand colic. I would recommend switching that to pea gravel. We did cover the ground under the loafing sheds with stall mats and sweep these daily, which has helped considerably. Jackson also suggests that you put in small patches of varied textures, for example, river rock or large stones, and this will help to develop lateral cartilages and hoof soles in your horses. Okay, let's talk about some of the pros and cons of what your primary footing choice could be. On the left, you'll see is hog fuel. Hog fuel is a type of fuel made from the unprocessed waste debris, bark, and organic matter produced as a result of commercial forestry. Hog fuel is used to power things like boilers and dryers. Many horsey types like to use it for riding trails. Evergreen is best as it absorbs urine smell. Horses do love to roll on it, but it will break down and need to be replaced, and some woods can be toxic. If it does break down too much before you replace it, it will actually add to the volume of your mud. On the right, you'll see a picture of 5/8 minus. This is a rock measurement that means that none of the stones will be larger than 5/8 of an inch. You don't want to go any bigger or it'll be uncomfortable for the horses and not fall through the tines of your dumpling fork. Sand is also a great choice. Horses love to sleep on it. Elaine Blickley recommends what's called coarse washed sand. We used concrete sand, and it is working great. It will get tracked around when it is wet, so plan to sweep out any areas where your horses will eat. Don't feed directly on the sand, but stall mats work well. On the right is pea gravel. Pea gravel is an excellent choice with horses with hoof issues. Our horse Willow has a history of laminitis, and the pea gravel keeps her moving and comfy. She even prefers it over using like rehab boots. Pete Ramey suggests a depth of 3 to 4 inches for horses with hoof challenges. I find mucking these areas the easiest. The gravel just falls right through the tines, except when the ground is frozen. That's a little tougher. On the left, you'll see hazelnut or filbert shells. This is a great organic option. With all the growers in Oregon, it is quite inexpensive here, and you're making the use of a natural byproduct. On the con, it will break down over time and need to be replaced. On the right, you'll see asphalt scrapings. This is common in the UK. On the pro, it can be quite inexpensive. On the negative, it may contain chemicals which you may wish to avoid having near your horses. As with many places around the world, mud management is a significant challenge in the winter here in the Pacific Northwest. To help address this, we installed gutters, added 3/4 minus to high traffic areas, carved a slope in all of our areas, put rubber stall mats in high traffic areas, and added French drains where needed. We were very surprised by how much rain you can divert and mud you can avoid by putting on gutters. With just our little barn alone, we diverted 34,000 gallons of water a year. So here's a calculation. You take your roof length times your roof width and then multiply that by the annual rainfall. For example, let's say you had a building that was 40 feet by 50 feet. That would be 2,000 square feet. So you multiply that by the average annual rainfall in your area. Let's say, for example, here in Portland, that would be 38 inches. So that would divert 76,000 gallons of water a year for a 2,000 square foot building. So I already mentioned that most of our track is either sand or pea gravel, and then it's at least 3 to 4 inches deep. However, in the high traffic areas right by the barn, we added an extra layer. We put down 3/4 minus, which we then tamp down by hand with a power tamper. You can rent that from your local hardware store. We then layered the pea gravel on top of that. This is a big learning that we gleaned from our friends up in Canada. You must take the time it takes to tamp down your 3/4 minus completely. This took us several days for about a 5,000 square foot area. The key is to tamp it down, wet it with water, tamp it again, Let it set and repeat until it feels a nice firm road. When our friends up north skip this step, the larger rocks just work their way right up through the sand, and within a couple of days, their paddocks were almost completely useless. Let's talk about shelter. Trees can provide lovely shelter, and my horses do seem to really enjoy hanging out underneath their branches. However, your horse's hooves can compact the soil, so you'll want to keep the horses out from directly under the tree. If you have nibblers, you will also want to prevent them from chewing on the bark. Providing them old and fallen tree branches inside the paddock can help to curb this desire. You will also want to consider the type of tree, as some of them can be quite toxic to horses. There's a reference list at the end of this presentation. We had hay shelters custom built, and this has worked out splendidly. We did put on a back wall to block the rain. If you have stormy weather coming in from several directions, you may wish to cover two sides. However, give considerable consideration to your herd's makeup before putting three sides on your shed. If your meeker horses are unable to escape, hooves and teeth can easily lead to injuries. A good general rule is to allow 2 horses per an equivalent stall size, for example, a 12 by 12 foot stall. Let's take an example of 4 horses. You would need 12 by 24 foot space. Deciding on materials, design, and size are all important decisions. Check the reference page for some great ideas on designing a shed for your horses. Let's talk about fencing options. Many types of fencing will work well for your Paddock Paradise. You may consider putting up a more permanent fencing on the outside perimeter and then electric fencing for the inside fence of the track. This will lower your costs significantly and give you the flexibility to rearrange your track if better design options appear throughout the seasons. We used electric wire for the entire fencing system. We are pleased with our electric fence and saved a lot of money by installing it ourselves. However, if your budget allows it, a permanent fence is best for the exterior perimeter. Here are some pros and cons for various fence types. On the left is an example of electric fencing. For the pros, it's relatively inexpensive, easy to install, easy to move. You only need minimal equipment to install it, and it's easy to repair. On the con side, it's got very low visibility, so it's not very attractive when you have to add all the flags so the horses can see it. It's also easily broken by the horses. Electrical tape and electrical rope are both more attractive. However, tape has a tendency to twist and get slack, and rope is much more pricey. For the wood on the right, obviously that's a beautiful fence. It provides great visibility for the horses. It will even increase your value of your property. However, it has a lot of maintenance. You will need to hammer loose nails and repaint it consistently. You actually need to expect to replace 50% of the boards within the lifetime of the fence, and horses love to chew wood, so it can end up being quite an expensive option. So here's an example of PVC fencing. On the pro side, it's highly visible, quite attractive, doesn't need painting, and horses don't like to chew it. Its elastic quality may reduce vet bills from injuries. On the con side, you may need to power wash mildew occasionally. It's rather expensive, and livestock can and will break it. On the right is pipe fencing. Pros, steel pipe is super strong and quite safe. Very little maintenance, high visibility, and horses won't usually chew on it. On the cons, it is quite expensive, and posts must be set in concrete. And last but not least is mesh fencing. On the pros, it looks fantastic. On the cons, it will need to be professionally installed as it needs to be stretched very tight. It does collect trash as winds blow and has a tendency to sag and bulge and is quite tough to trim under it. Let's talk about designing your layout. Naturally, you're going to want to optimize the use of your specific property. Your plan will be completely different than anybody else's. Here are some things to consider. First of all, spread out your resources. You want to spread out the resources to encourage movement. Horses are designed to walk 10 to 30 miles per day. With just a little enticement, they are happy to travel to water, hay, rolling areas, sleeping areas, tree branches to nibble on, salt licks, shade, and shelter. Use what you have. Consider how you can incorporate existing buildings and special features like hills, valleys, and trees into your design. For example, we took our stall doors off and opened up 2 stalls for optional shelter and daily feedings. Provide enough space in corners and tracks for horses to move freely. Jackson recommends that your track be at least 12 feet wide to allow for skirmishes and yet still encourage travel. Our pathways are 18 feet wide, and this has worked quite well for us. Another author I read had used 6-foot wide pathways, and she felt that this really helped the horses continually move. Be sure to round your corners to prevent any horses getting trapped by more aggressive peers. Chore ease. I am really pleased with our layout, and yet I can easily walk almost 3 miles per day just distributing hay, picking up hay, and mucking. Consider the distance to your manure pile, water troughs, hay nets, hay storage, tool shed, and the locations of your hoses. Water location is key. It needs to be accessible to everyone. Putting your water next to a gate or a corner can easily lead to injuries and/or some horses not drinking enough water. Consider having more than one water trough, if your herd dynamics warrant this. Also, if possible, keep your water out of the sun and be cognizant of what tree leaves and debris might drop into your tanks. Plan ahead with your gate locations. We have temporary gates, which you can see in red, and permanent gates, which you can see in blue. Our temporary gates we can put up at a moment's notice to secure the horses into one of 3 sections. This helps us with chores or in case of emergencies. Our permanent gates, you want to locate them to allow easy access in and out of the track. Ensure you have enough space around the gates to allow horses to exit without getting too close to their peers. Consider what kinds of changes you may see throughout the seasons. This may affect where your sunny and shady spots are, where your cold winds and precipitation come from, and what kind of mud management you will need to worry about in low areas. Throughout the year, we found differences in our wind direction, our rain direction, extra mud challenges, icy conditions, sun and shade, hard-packed earth when it got dusty, and water and flow puddle issues. We are thrilled with our Paddock Paradise. We just finished the final phase a couple months ago and have already noticed weight loss in my insulin-resistant horse and muscle development in both horses. The mares are happy and it is fun to see where they choose to hang out throughout the day. They are much more likely to spontaneously canter around and earnestly seem to be enjoying themselves. With the benefits of more movement, more horse time, better sleep, better hoof health, and stress reduction, you may wish to build your own track system. If so, we would love to hear about your Paddock Paradise journey. Here's a list of references and further reading. I'll leave it up for 10 seconds so you can take a screenshot if you wish. It's also available on my website, bridlesandbreath.com. Thank you so much for learning with us.